So what causes guys to relapse? I've listened to relapse stories, dozens and dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of relapse stories from guys. And I'm convinced that there are essentially two types of relapse scenarios. I'm convinced that these two types pretty much summarized most relapses. Today, I want to break down those relapses into two categories and also explain how I think we can reverse engineer them, hopefully towards a more successful conclusion next time we're faced with those inevitable challenges to our sobriety. So welcome aboard to Finding Traction.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, before we get into talking about these two types of relapses, let me just say I do love to connect with guys that are looking to move away from porn, looking towards a better life. And one of the things I love to do is just have a Zoom call with a guy. Just say, hey, tell me about your story. Maybe I can help. Maybe here's some resources that can help, recommend some books or some podcasts. Sometimes, they're a good fit to join a Finding Traction group. Other times I say, you know what, you should check out my buddy Matt Dobschutz at Porn Free Radio, or check out Mark Dennison, or check out different guys that I work with. And so again, it's not about me trying to get you to fit my program. The question is, how can I serve you? How can I help you get out of your stuck place to move towards a better future? Towards groups, one of the new groups I'm working on, and usually it takes sometimes a few weeks when I start getting a bit of a waiting list. One group that I'm working on is a group that it looks like we're looking at Thursday afternoons Pacific time. So like a 4:45 Thursday Pacific time. So that's a new traction group that we're probably going to be joining. And in that group, we get 4 or 5 guys together. We walk through the 52-week traction material together. We share our lives. We connect with each other throughout the week, and really helps guys turn the heat up, so to speak, in terms of their intentionality. So again, if you're interested in just connecting with me about that, or just hearing about some resources, email me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. And if you want the website, you can just check that out. It's just bandofbrothers.care, and you can find out some of that same information as well. Okay, so let's go back and talk about these two types of relapses. And one of the things in our groups that we do is we start the group with guys giving a 3 or 4 minute check-in. They walk through their feelings. They walk through some of the steps they're taking around self-care. They also talk about how their sobriety is going. They do a slip report. They talk about it in just open, honest, candid ways. And then we also look at ways going forward, things coming up in our future that are both challenges but also opportunities to grow. So we always start. It takes 3-4 minutes. Guys check in. And for me, that's always a super important time, because guys are learning honesty. Many of us who struggled with addictions, we've hidden, we've learned to practice deception, we minimize, and oftentimes guys, for the first time, they begin to say, this is where I'm really at. And it's really important for me. We create a culture in our groups. They're not shame-based. We're not holding each other's feet to the fire. We recognize that we're learning to tell the truth to ourselves, to one another. There is a time where we will say, okay, what do we learn from a relapse? Tell me how the situation happened. And guys are actually usually pretty good in explaining what happened, how things led to a relapse. And oftentimes, just in them sharing it, excuse me, they're often coming up with their own solutions and, their own sort of takeaways. But in hearing and listening to guys' stories, I've kind of begun to cluster guys' relapse stories into one of two major areas. And I think I was talking about this in a group this last week, and one of my guys, my buddy John, said, "Hey, you've got to put this in a podcast because this is helpful in terms of just maybe giving guys some diagnostic tools." So the first type of relapse I am going to call an impulse relapse. The second type of relapse we're going to call a slow build relapse. So we've got two types of relapses. We've got an impulse relapse and a slow build relapse. So I want to take each in turn and then look at maybe some proactive ways that we can improve our chances of success next time we face one of those two scenarios. Okay, so the first one is what we're going to call the impulse scenario. And this is where your autopilot gets you in trouble. Some opportunity in your environment is within easy arm's reach. And without thinking about it, well, there was some thought, but almost impulsively, you simply reached out and took hold of that opportunity within easy reach. Consider, for example, I think my favorite type of potato chips is, I don't know if you have them in, outside of Canada, they're called Miss Vicky's. They're great chips. And let's just say you're trying to lose weight, but you've got an open bag of Miss Vicky's chips sitting beside you. Well, you're going to go about your work, and at some time throughout the day, you're going to realize, my goodness, I've eaten almost that whole bag of chips. And I hardly even, it's like I didn't even do it intentionally. It just happened. I know, and that is an example of an impulse. Now, you got to remember, our brain loves simplifying things. Remember the very first time you drove a car, you were thinking about 100 different things. Am I in the lane, the right lane or left lane for you, some of you British people, but am I in the right lane? Am I too close to the side, too close to the middle? Am I checking my blind spots? Am I looking behind me? Oh my goodness, all of these things, and your brain was having to make all of these decisions. Oh, there's a corner coming up. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Oh, it's a light coming up. Can I make it through the light? How do I know? Should I gun it? What if it turns orange? Right? All of these things. But over time, you just, start your autopilot takes over. And now sometimes you may drive to work, the same route, whatever, and you get to work without even hardly thinking about it. You simply go, gee, I don't even remember half the things of what happened. I just did it on autopilot. Another example, I used to teach typing way back in the day. I was actually a really good typer. I could type over 60 words a minute. I used to teach typing. I used to teach business courses, again, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And now all I do is see a word. If you're a good touch typer, you just see a word and your fingers start moving, right? You have this connection that you've just developed between seeing a word or thinking of a word, and your fingers just automatically move. That is autopilot. That is impulse. And so many of us, because porn is within such easy reach, we end up reaching out for it simply on impulse. Now, for example, in terms of coming up with some strategies, this is where a recent podcast that I did on the 20-second rule comes in. You are far more likely to do something that is easy to activate within 20 seconds. There's very little thought. There's very little resistance. If it's simply have a thought, see something, act on it. See clickbait of bikini girl, click on clickbait of bikini girl, right? You get it? You've done it, right? Within 20 seconds. It's automatic. It is an impulse. So, In this scenario, what do we do to set ourselves up for success in these areas of impulses? Well, to quote Benjamin Hardy in his book, Willpower is Not Enough, what we do is we outsource our willpower to a better environment. We simply say, okay, what are the choices I want to make? I create an environment that makes those choices automatic. I remove those things that are impulsively putting me in the negative direction, and I add those things that impulsively put me in the right direction. Now, here's where I get guys pushing back sometimes, because guys are not too bad in, some big picture things. Now, they might have covenant eyes on their phone or their computer or, whatever that is. But at some point, people, here's the problem, Vernon. Here's why I don't know if I agree with that. I don't always act on those impulses. It's not like every time I have an opportunity, I act. So you're wrong to say, I see a bikini girl, I click on bikini girl. No, it's not that simple. It might be every third time or every fifth time. It's intermittent. And that's the challenge, right? You never know when those impulses are going to strike. And so you say, well, normally I'm good at not acting on those impulses. Yeah, that's true until you're not. Until some stars line up and you just act impulsively. Could be, whatever that is. So what you do is you prepare for when that impulse does hit. You put the candy away, the Miss Vickies away. You create a greater resistance. You create a better environment so you're not having those impulses that get you in trouble. And when you have that longer lead time to act out, it gives you a chance for your better angels or the better version of yourself or whatever it is to think again, to act, to intervene, to do something different than simply act on an impulse. So that's the first type of relapse, impulse relapses. Now, my wife says I make up stats all the time, so I know this won't disappoint her. I'm going to say just anecdotally that I think this covers a good 80% of guys' relapses in the early days. And some guys never ever get past this form of relapse to look at the second type, because this first cluster or category of relapse is working, in quotes, working so effectively for them. They just acting on impulse, acting on appetites, and that's primarily the way that they act out. Okay, there is a second type of relapse, and I've already called it the slow build relapse. This is a trickier one because now this really has to do with the episodic nature that most of us experience in acting out. And probably and what I mean by episodic is simply this. You can't, you might act out only every 3 days, or you might act out every week or 3 weeks or 3 months, right? So the problem is the challenge of the episodic, acting out is that, when you're between episodes, you convince yourself, I'm actually doing pretty good. I'm on a roll here. I've got a streak going. I'm feeling pretty strong. And so as a result, you're actually setting yourself up simply by that attitude. So this second type, assuming that you've begun to deal with the first type of relapse, this is where the second type of relapse can set in. And this is where going back and looking at the stopwatch diagram I did more recently could be really helpful. Jonathan Darty from Pure Sex Radio. I just did a podcast with him. It's probably going to come out in a couple months. And he asked me to explain this stopwatch diagram just because it can be really helpful in helping guys be proactive. So in the slow build form of relapse, what happens is we're going along and then we get triggered by it could be an external source of arousal. A girl at the workout gym. It could be it could be seeing somebody. It could be watching a show on TV, which is racier than whatever that is. And so it could be that external source of arousal, or it could be some internal uncomfortable feeling. All right, and that you want to get away from, or you want to avoid, or you want to deal with or medicate. So external, internal. At this point, what happens is the thought rents out a room in your brain, and it just sits there. And the thought looks like, wouldn't it be nice if, or, this would be a time where I could feel better if I, right? Or, wow, I sure remember when I would do this. So it just sits there. It sits there. It sits quietly in a single room, and in your brain. It's an internal mental idea. And then over time, what it does is it knocks out the walls in that room, and now it's kind of occupying the room next to it on the left and the room next to it on the right. And now it's really controlling 3 rooms in the motel in your brain, right? And before you know, this is becoming a more, we call it preoccupation. It's becoming a bigger thought. It's becoming more pressing. It's becoming more insistent. Now, at some point, you cease resisting that thought, and you just say, "Hey, take whatever room you want." And what happens is then you begin to go through your time-honored rituals of preparing yourself or heading towards your next binge. Now, this process can happen. It can take place over minutes. It can take place over hours or days, or whatever. But the point is this: it is a slow build. It's building towards relapse. And it would be like you took a balloon and you added a little bit of air, and then you add a little bit more air, and a little bit more air, and a little bit more air. Now, sometimes guys are able to stop adding air for a period of time. It's like they push pause on the build and they go, "Hey, I'm good now. I didn't act out today." But it's still, the balloon is still 30%, 40% full. And so eventually something happens and they start adding more air, 60% full, 70% full. And of course, as you continue adding air to the balloon, eventually it reaches the bursting point. And that's when, again, you move towards a full-blown relapse. Now, if you've listened to that episode on the stopwatch, you can probably script out some avenues of escape or ways of intervening in the process. Now, it's possible that you can stop, and you can kick out that, squatter in those rooms by distracting yourself, by going for a walk, by practicing some form of meditation, or, something like that. But oftentimes you've just stopped it temporarily. We've talked about how the only way that I know is that and that's why groups for me are so important, you practice honesty and humility. You say, "Man, this happened to me. I just feel so triggered right now. I feel so aroused. I just feel so vulnerable." And you tell on yourself, and you begin to basically allow yourself to approach, your recovery buddies. You begin, out of a place of need. For me, that's the most effective way of reverse engineering that. And sometimes it takes, I got a guy that calls me up and says, "Hey, this is my third, 12-step call today," whatever. Sometimes it takes that. It doesn't mean it needs to be every day, but when you're in that place early, you practice it before it builds its momentum. Now, one mistaken belief that you have to confront yourself is guys go, "You know what? If we're talking about building, slow build, I know I'm biologically built for release, sexually every so many days or whatever that is. I might as well indulge my body because my body needs release anyways." Now, especially when something like masturbation has been so paired or tied with fantasy or pornography, that's always very difficult to separate out. This is not an anti-masturbation talk, but I'm simply saying that the reality is that kind of thinking more often than not is self-defeating. But if you say, you know what, I'm just going to act out here. I'm just going to look at a little bit of porn. I'm going to masturbate. I'm going to have a release. Then I'm going to be able to go to sleep. Or then it will break the spell. Then it will break the power, the intensity of that preoccupied thinking. Well, there's two mistakes to that thinking. Number one, oftentimes it's just the beginning of a binge, which goes on for, you return to it more, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. It can be over days. So that's the first mistaken, part of that. The second thing is you've actually just recharged your brain. You've simply deepened the habit, and you trained your body to be artificially overcharged. So you've actually not broken any real habit. Whatever you've achieved in the very, very short term, you've done at the long-term expense, right? Physiologically, without porn, even without masturbation, your body will naturally take care of itself. You will have a wet dream. You won't blow up or get blue balls or whatever it is. Your brain will reset. You will come down to what is normal physiologically for you, right? You won't die. These are the sort of things, again, the mistaken beliefs as well. You know what? I just have to, I know a way to reset. Well, it's not really a reset. So let's go back and talk about these two types of relapses. The first one is simply the impulse relapse, where we've trained ourselves habitually to just act on impulses. Let me say on that one as well, let me throw in the further and the more distance you separate yourself from those impulses, you actually do discover, I've got guys to say, because I've not been involved in porn now for weeks or months, I actually now, when I'm faced with an opportunity, I just don't immediately grab that opportunity. I actually have far better ability now to not act on that impulse. But that's the first type. And the second one is simply the idea of a slow build, where we learn to, what happens is we simply don't deal with the beginning preoccupations in our mind. We don't reach out, and as a result, it builds and builds and builds until, for the sake of relief, we just go ahead and act out, and in one sense, end up not helping ourselves in the future. So, my hope is, first of all, that you would learn to shut off the easy access points, and then you would learn, as you get some freedom there, learn to deal with the second form of relapse as well. And in doing so, you'll become a lot more in tune with the normal and natural ways your sex drive was meant to operate. You'll also be a lot more confident in moving into your future, and as Mr. Hardy would say, your future self. So have a great day. You'll hear from me again. Thanks again.